And so that's where we are tonight. We're going to look at this. So let me open us up in prayer, and then we'll start to just take this apart bit by bit. Let's pray. Lord God, I thank you for tonight. I thank you for this text of Scripture. I just pray that that you would help us to understand your word better. And just be with our kids tonight, wherever they're at. Lord, I pray that you be with us. For those who are not here tonight too, is just bless them. God, I just pray that everything we do would give you glory. Pray these things in your name, Jesus. Amen. All right, so here we are in chapter 4. Now, I've been told you said blue and red work.
Well, the ones that are down there are working.
Those work. Oh, wow, look at that. It makes a difference being upside down tonight. So we're going to begin in verse 4. We'll start in verse 20 tonight and on. That's how we're going to be. All right, so here's where it says. It says, now Judah and Israel were as numerous as the sand of the sea, and they were eating and drinking and rejoicing. And Solomon ruled all the kingdoms from the Euphrates River to the land of the Philistines and as far as the border of Egypt, and they offered tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life. Now I want you to think about really how big this is at this point for Solomon. So if you will, you probably want to look at the back of your Bible. If you have some maps, I want to point out something. I'll draw it up here, but it's not that good when you see how I draw it. It's never that pleasant to see my maps. But if you look at these maps right here, and I'm gonna also show. So I'll draw it out for you. What are the borders that he says again in those verses, right? So I always gotta. Here is kind of. This is Egypt. This is Israel. This is the Red Sea. And this would be like the Euphrates River. Okay, so look at those. Look at those and what you're seeing right here in the in the directions of what it says. So once again, it says that Israel, that his kingdom, he ruled over all the kingdoms, meaning his kingdom. We had Israel, right, which was Solomon's. This would have been, for the most part, this, right? But he also he ruled over all the other kingdoms, meaning that it's stretched all the way over to here, to Euphrates River. So we're talking, if you look at your map, where that Euphrates River, that's up far, and that's eastward. What was that?
I said, which one? Because I've got several.
Look at one, even just look at one right now. If they don't show you Solomon's kingdom, if they don't show you Solomon's kingdom, look at Abraham's map right now, and you can see that, this is Arabia here, right? And so he's got all the way over to the Euphrates River, okay, that way, right? He has Euphrates River. It says he goes to the land of the Philistines, which would have been over here. He's got, notice what else he's got. It says, and as far as the border to Egypt, so kind of around here. So he's got a pretty wide area that he has taken over. Now I want you to also listen and notice what it says too about Israel. Notice what it says in just that verse. They're as numerous as the sand of the sea. Now, we don't take that literally. That's not meant to be taken literally. It's just meant to be. It's meant to say that they've been a lot. There's a lot of them, but it also should perk our attention that it's actually a fulfillment of something from earlier. Does anybody know what that is a fulfillment of? That they are as numerous as the sand of the sea.
When God had told Abraham that he would make you.
Yeah, this is what it's saying is at this point. That they're as numerous as the sand of the sea. That they are, God has said to him before, I'm going to make you great. I'm going to make you numerous. And now that's what it's saying is, at this point in the reign of Solomon, it's kind of fulfilled. Listen what it says in, look at some of these things that you'll see here. So early on, God tells him, he said, I'm going to make your name great. And those are pieces in chapter 12. Listen about the borders that God promises Abraham in chapter 15. Chapter 15 of Genesis, here's what it says. Don't go there, I'll just read it. On verse 18 it says, on that day the Lord made a covenant with Abraham, saying, I will give this land to your offspring from the brook of Egypt, right? He says, to the great river, the Euphrates River, the land of the Kenites, the Kenizzites, the Canaanites, the Hethites, the Perizzites, the Rephaim, the Amorites, the Canaanites, the Girgashites, and the Jebusites. And that's all those people who were over here. And essentially, what this is saying right now is that this is a fulfillment of Genesis 15. That land, at this point, he is really over all of that. That's been given and under the control of the people of Israel. You know, David pushed the borders out pretty far when he was fighting, but for the most part, those borders are now, it appears to be somewhat of a fulfillment of what God had told them, that this was what was going to happen to them. And so that's what we see at this time, is that the land is pretty much, and the truth is, it's about as big as it's going to be, and it's very short-lived. But yeah, so now we see that the promise of multiple descendants, as numerous as the sand of the sea, and these borders, that's stuff that God had already talked about would happen, and now it appears that those are being fulfilled during the time of Solomon. Look what happens next. Now it says, they offered tribute and served Solomon all the days of his life, meaning these people who are all around that his area controlled, these people, I don't know what it would have looked like, how, but they all took care of Solomon. They gave him stuff. In the ancient world, by the way, typically taxation, now they had taxes, but a lot of your taxes, really your income came from these vassal states, that you would make them supply your kingdom with the money. In fact, little kingdom, what they would want to do so they would not be killed is they would then say, we will pay. And so that's what happened, is you survived as a little kingdom. You were not destroyed and taken over simply because you would just continue to pay and help all the money go into the major kingdom. So there we are right there. Look at verse 22. Now, Solomon's provisions for one day were 150 bushels of fine flour, 300 bushels of meal, 10 fattened cattle, 20 range cattle, and 100 sheep and goats, besides deer, gazelles, roebucks, and pen-fed poultry. For he had dominion over everything west of the Euphrates, from Tipsah to Gaza, and over all the kings west of Euphrates. And he had peace on all his surrounding borders. So that's just another thing to say that he's got all this peace that's coming around his area, and everybody is helping supply his needs. Now here's something I'd like to look and do the math on. Any of y'all know, because I didn't know, how much a bushel is? Y'all, when's the last time y'all used bushels? Anybody have a different translation, by the way?
Is it 6 pecks as a bushel?
I don't know.
If you're on a farm, you'll know what
Exactly.
bushel is.
Yeah, exactly.
Bushel basket?
So the word behind the text that you'll see is actually a word that it's called a core. And so you might actually see in there, so like in mine, it says that first off that that the first one, that he had 30 cores, and they translate it as 150 bushels. Like, that's going to help me. Like, we go from cores to bushels. That's still not that helpful. But let's go with the bushels, because the bushels are actually a little bit more of a modern weight. So
I had to learn that in grade school.
what, the bushels? Yeah, because it has to do with weights for farming.
It's 9.3 liquid gallons.
Yeah, so let's do some math if we can. If you actually do it, here's what it sort of comes out to be. Okay, so 150 bushels. 150 bushels, right? That is of flour, and then there's 300 bushels of meal. Okay, so this should be, and I think the estimates say this would be about 9,000 pounds, and this is about 18,000 pounds. Okay, that's daily. Now this is for the central government of Jerusalem, it appears. This is feeding everybody. In fact, estimations are that they're baking probably somewhere about 28,000 pounds of bread. And estimations is that they're feeding 14 to 22,000 people a day with that. They're feeding everybody in there. So that's a lot. 14 to 22,000 people being fed. It's interesting. As I looked this up, they'll talk about these cores, and they said they're similar to another terminology, which is a homer. And you'll see a homer, but this is what makes sense actually. Is the homer, the root word there is the word for donkey in the original text. And what they did is they would measure based on donkey cart load. And so you would have, how many bushels could fit on a donkey cart load would be considered one homer or one core. But yeah, when you look at how much bread they're baking, that's a lot of bread. And so you look at the bread, and then you got to think of the cattle. Remember, not only do you have 10 fattened cattle, 20 range cattle, you got 100 sheep. I mean, it just goes on and on. They're feeding a ton of people. But these are numbers that, if you keep this in mind, it'll make sense a little bit later, because there's another set of numbers in bushels that we got to look at as well. Notice that this is, and actually, there are other ancient Near Eastern records where they say this is kind of in line with what they did. This kind of overall supply for their central government and their people. This is kind of what they did. This is just how the world worked at that time. So notice what else it says. So it says that they had peace on all the borders, and throughout Israel, throughout Solomon's reign, Judah and Israel lived in safety from Dan to Beersheba, meaning everybody in Israel, they all lived in safety, each person under his own vine and his own fig tree. Now, it's interesting, you'll see, let me read you just another, this is from one of the prophets. This is a picture of blessing. It doesn't necessarily mean that every person had their own vine and their own fig tree, but what it's saying is that everybody had supply, and everybody enjoyed the produce and the plenty of the land. And so you'll see from a reference like this in the text, this comes from Micah chapter 4, says that he will settle disputes among many peoples and provide arbitration for strong nations that are far away. They'll beat their swords into plows and their spears into pruning knives. Nation will not take up sword against nation. They'll never again train for war. But each person will sit under his grapevine and under his fig tree with no one to frighten him. For the mouth of the Lord of armies has spoken. Though all peoples each walk in the name of their gods, we will walk in the name of the Lord our God forever and ever. So it's just an image of blessing at this time, that everybody has, so to speak, a fig tree and the vine, and they've got fruit. The fruit of the land is blessing them. And in that area, you had, here's the kind of, really the stereotypical produce is you have olives, you have, of course, grapes, and then you've got, your figs. Figs are one. Remember, that's the story of Jesus, too. And they're walking, he sees that old fig tree that didn't put anything out, which is also doesn't put out thing when it's not in season either. And he curses it. But by the way, that's one of the reasons why, because we'll see, they're going to mention olives in the next chapter. It's one of the reasons why I requested that we put olive trees in here. They're a nice biblical tree. They look like bushes right now, but one day they might look a little bit thicker.
Need some pomegranates too.
Yeah. They don't have fruit. We're not allowed to have fruit. Yeah, I don't want that black stuff all over there. Let's start making it'll look terrible. There's no fruit, no palm. They're a special Phoenix brand of olive tree. Yeah. No, everybody gave me pushback on that, but the guy said, don't worry, we can't have those anyways. All right, so here we are. So each person, now here's something else we're going to start to notice. The next set of verses, here's what it says. So it talks about the blessings of the people, and there is something to be said that God, as he had blessed Solomon, really, remember Solomon said, I want you to give me wisdom so I can lead this great people of yours. And really, because God has provided wisdom to this man, the people all live in peace and in plenty at this time. There's a real blessing that comes when you have God's man leading them. That's what we see here. Now, notice the next part here. Solomon had 40,000 stalls of horses for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Each of those deputies for a month in turn provided food for King Solomon and for everyone who came to King Solomon's table, and they neglected nothing. And each man brought the barley and the straw for the chariot teams and the other horses to the required place according to his assignment. Now remember that earlier on in verse 7 of chapter 4, he gave that list of these 12 men, and they were over certain regions. Each one of those regions they had 1 month where that was their job to provide everything we just read to Solomon. So each section had their month. They would get all their grain and all that stored up and bring it with their cattle and with all of that to provide for the kingdom that way. So it's just talking a little bit more about that. Now there's something to notice, and we'll put this up here. 26 says that he had 40,000 chariots. Okay? 40,000 stalls for his chariots and 12,000 horsemen. Now, I want to ask you, do we have any different numbers in your translations?
Yes.
What do your numbers say?
Mine says 4,000 stalls.
4,000 stalls. Okay, so let me ask you this. Is it 4,000 or is it 40,000? Anybody else who has in your here has 40,000 in their text? So 40,000, you have 4,000. Now what translation do you use? Okay, and you're using NIV? What are you using, Tom?
ESV.
ESV? King James. Ah, King James. Right. This is gonna bring us back to the standard.
That's right.
King James, it's over. What are you using?
No, it's a
Okay, ESV. And those are actually ESV and King James, very similar. So let me read you this. Somebody look at 2 Chronicles 9:25. 2 Chronicles 9:25.
Now this one, it says 925 says that Solomon had 4,000 stalls for horses and chariots and 12,000 horsemen whom he bestowed in his chariot cities and with the king of Jerusalem.
Okay.
And that's his four.
Okay. So if you read 2 Chronicles 9:25, they say it's 4,000. But King says it's 40,000. Okay? Now, you got to keep in mind too, he says they got 12,000 horsemen. What are you doing with 12,000 horsemen but 40,000, 40,000, it's kind of a crazy number to think about. And so let me explain what this is. Most likely, what we see here is that Chronicles is giving us what the accurate number is. The Chronicles number seems a little bit more accurate. What it appears is that in the copyist who copied for the Hebrew text for this passage, when you look at how the text comes together, the difference between 40,000 and 4,000 is much like the way you would see in English today, right? So 4 and 40, granted, we have FOUR, but really it's a matter of, it appears that what a copyist did, and Chronicles preserves it, these are the two little letters that would have been added on, that he would have added, and it changes everything. So it goes from 4,000 to 40,000. And so by all estimations, what we assume, and this is called textual criticism, is that when we read something like this, it appears that what he probably did is he was writing, and you got to remember, a lot of the time, there's not a lot of spaces that are involved, and there's no verse numbers. Those are put in way later. So you got to imagine, as a guy is writing by hand everything out, at some point he writes these little things, and then what it turns 40,000. It changes 4,000 into 40,000, and then boom, that number gets copied. But Chronicles is there to show us that this was what the original number would have been. So it's pretty fascinating that that's there. And so what that does is it does not mean, what that shows us is that the writer of Kings is not wrong. What we know is that whoever would have copied the original manuscript of Kings, remember, it's all by hand. And that's a lot of what we see. When you start to look in your Bible, you'll see a lot of stuff like that. And a lot of it comes down to is that most of the time when there's a difference between a text, it has to do with things like that. Very minor. It's a letter or two that are added, and then it'll change the whole word. And then you'll have one group of people that will copy based on that, and then you'll see manuscripts made from that copy with those little letter changes, which change everything. And so, not the meaning is not changed, but a number is changed. And so that's what you see. So Chronicles gives us probably what is the real number here, which should probably be 4,000. We're going to get to more of that, by the way. There's another one of those coming up tonight.
Mine, because Chronicles still says 4,000.
Yeah, so I'm saying is that Chronicles is giving us what is probably the right one, which is 4. And the writer of Kings, as he copied the manuscript or whoever copied Kings, because what we have are copies of copies of copies. And so what it appears is that Chronicles is looking at this, because he gives us the 12, and Chronicles tends to have some numbers the way that they do it. They're a little bit, he's looking at everything. Chronicles is writing much later than Kings too. Chronicles is probably the last book of the Bible to have been written in the Old Testament. And so his number is saying that it should have been 4. And what that means is that the manuscript the writer of Chronicles is looking at, the original actually did say that. But whoever copied 1 Kings later on decided or looked and saw the next word and added that in, or he cut that word off and shoved it over, and then from ever on in that manuscript, it now is 40 instead of 4,000. Interesting. Not a lot to dwell on there, but I like dealing with those because we don't typically have time on a Sunday morning to deal with why is it that it says some manuscripts say this and some manuscripts say that. But you can rest assured that the bulk of any time we have stuff like that, a lot of it comes down to just minor copyist errors. And we're pretty sure, because what you'll see is you'll see another text that will preserve it, and then you'll see a whole group of texts that appear that they were the copies of the copies of the copies that put that letter in. And so I have a text in my office, and it's this thick, and all it is the Hebrew Old Testament, and it has a footnote section of every page. It's about that much. And it's just a little note, and every time that there is these Germans did it, every time there's a manuscript that it says, okay, the Greek actually says this, and all that, and so what it comes out is, but most of the time it's a letter. He misspelled this, and he wrote this, or it sounded like this as somebody was reading it to him, because there's that too. Sometimes these guys are copying things down, and it's somebody who's reading a manuscript, and you got multiple guys copying. So it's just, when you get into the world of how manuscripts were made, it's fascinating that we have a text that is still the way that it is, that we're able to then go backwards to like even older copies and realize that our text is exactly the same. The meaning has not changed at all. Fun stuff, but not tonight. I probably should get somebody to come in and do that for us at some point. Okay, I forgot. So 4,000 horse stalls, okay? That would have been a lot of horsemen and a lot of just stalls, empty stalls, it seems, right? So 4,000 horse stalls. Think about that. Now, notice that it says, so he's got all these guys who are there. I want you to read something now. Let's look at Deuteronomy 17, and I want you to let's read 14 through 20 together. Now, notice in the text right now, he doesn't say anything negative about this, right? He doesn't say anything negative about, and he's got all these horses. And you're saying, well, why would you say anything negative about having a lot of horses? Today we would say it was negative because of all the methane that probably they would have put out. And if they didn't know that there's a reason why Israel was so warm, because Solomon had all of his horses. But look at Deuteronomy, and let's read Deuteronomy. When you read Deuteronomy, you're almost like, wow, look at how Solomon stacks up to this. Verse 14 of chapter 17. When you enter the land the Lord your God is giving you, take possession of it and live in it, and say, I'll set a king over me like the nations around me. You're to appoint a king the Lord chooses, your God chooses. Appoint a king for your brothers. You're not to set a foreigner over you, one who's not your people. He must not acquire many horses for himself, or send the people back to Egypt to acquire many horses, for the Lord told you, you must never go back that way again. Now we're going to get a little bit more ahead, but let's read this next one too, because that's not coming up for a little bit. He must not acquire many wives for himself, so his heart won't go astray. He must not acquire very large amounts of silver and gold for himself. And when he's seated on the royal throne, he's to write a copy of this instruction for himself on a scroll in the presence of the Levitical priests, and it to remain with him all the days of his life, so he may learn to fear the Lord his God, to observe all the words of this instruction, and to do these statutes. Then his heart will not be exalted above his countrymen. He'll not turn from the command to the right or the left, for he and his sons will continue reigning for many years in Israel. So, right now, the author has said, Deuteronomy says, don't get a lot of horses. And there's two reasons why. Don't go to Egypt, because you need to go back to Egypt. Don't ever go back to Egypt and rely on them. But the other part is this, is God wanted, remember, they wanted a king who would be like the nations, who would fight all their battles for you. And so they trusted in if you're a king and you trust in your military, it becomes very easy to stop trusting in God, because you look at the might that you have. The chariot was the equivalent of a tank at those times. And so you're looking and you're saying, look at the army that I've amassed. Now as you read this text, you're not seeing the writer of Kings say, and it was a terrible thing. Right now, the writer of Kings is just kind of glossing over them. But what you're going to find is at some point, it's all going to add up. And you're going to see, we saw it from the very beginning. If you have Deuteronomy 17 in mind, this should start flashing, though, now. And you say, wait a second, maybe he shouldn't have done that. Because God has been blessing, but now these are some of Solomon's actions now. So now he's amassed this giant army for himself, a lot of horses there. Now, notice, let's keep moving. It says, verse 28, each man brought barley and straw for the chariot teams and the other horses to the required place according to his assignment. Now God gave Solomon wisdom, very great insight and understanding as vast as the sand of the seashore. Just saying, he had a lot of wisdom, and it was divine. God opened his mind to really understand a lot of stuff. Notice that it's not just Proverbs and things like that. Notice what he was involved with. Solomon's wisdom was greater than the wisdom of all the people of the East, greater than all the wisdom of Egypt. He was wiser than anyone, wiser than Ethan the Ezrahite, Heman, Calcol, Dardar, the sons of Mahal. His reputation extended to all the surrounding nation. So one of the things that's interesting, because we'll get to some more of this, but let's look at some of these people. So who does he say he's wiser than? He's wiser than who? All right, so Solomon is wiser than, I'll just do it like this. Here's Solomon. This is like in the math class. Is greater than the men of the East. Now, if you remember, the people of the East were known for their wisdom. So think about Job. The people of those areas, all these wise men are coming in to bring out their wisdom and to talk to people. Think about in the stories that you know of, like, think about Daniel and things like that. You've got these men who their job is to be in the throne room with the king to provide wisdom. They're supposed to be the advisors, the trusted men to try to help them understand what it is that the gods would want them to do or how to do what they need to do. But that's what the ancient world really thrived on having these wise men. And so what it's saying is that, Solomon's wisdom, people started noticing that Solomon was different than that, and his wisdom was better than what you could get anywhere in the world. And so you see that he's better than those of the East. So the Babylonians, all those people who would have been known, but not, at this time, the Babylonians are not the Babylonians. They're not the grand empire, but they're still known for their wisdom in the East. in Egypt, in a lot of these places too, they had their wisdom, their wise men, but a lot of the time their wisdom was not about so much morality. It was about more magic. It was kind of like, here are the things that you could do, and here's how the ways that you could get the gods to do what you need them to do. And so it's kind of a different way of how wisdom would have been done. But what we see is it's starting to say that he's better than all these other wise men. And so you don't have to look far to when you start looking at some of the texts and you see that there are these wise men that even some of the people like Daniel belong to, that you'll see, when Joseph is brought into Pharaoh's court, there are all these individuals that are there to try to interpret the dreams. These are the kind of people that he's saying his wisdom is known to be greater than these people. He says greater than that of Egypt, and then he gives these names. Let me ask you this. Anybody know who Ethan is? Now, the sad is I was going to gloss over these names, right? I was like, Ethan the Ezrahite. I'd be like, nobody cares who Ethan the Ezrahite is, right? Let's just blow that guy off. Obviously, he was super important, right? And I was like, nobody cares who Ethan is. Nobody cares who, Heman or Calcol are, right? This was in my arrogance. And I'm going to tell you why in just a second. And Dardar, really, there's this pizza place that Diana and I look, and it's called like Dodo's Pizza. And it's like nobody wants to go to a place called Dodo's Pizza. Like, I'm not even going to go because I just don't like the name. Okay, well, it could be good. So now I'm being tough. See, I'm glad I threw that out there, right? But you look at the names, and you're just like, what names? Okay, so here's what's crazy, right? When you start to look at this, let me show you two things, okay? Here is what I had no clue, okay? Psalm 88 and 89. Let me read you the titles of these. Psalm 88 and 89. A song of the sons of Korah for the choir director, according to Mahalal Leonoth, a maskell of Heman the Ezrahite. 89. A maskell of Ethan the Ezrahite. These are guys who they've written scripture for us. Okay? And I totally blew them off because I didn't know. I just thought, they would have been significant. No, these are people that at some point, it appears, probably were well known in the time of Israel's history, and actually we've preserved two of their psalms that are in our psalters. These would have been good, godly people that I just kicked off, just because I was like, I never heard of them before, and it's just because I never looked at the titles of the psalms long enough on some of them to actually see. And now I tell all of YouTube and everybody that as well, that I don't look at the titles enough. So let me give you one more. 1 Chronicles, and 1 Chronicles chapter 2 says the following as well. 1 Chronicles 2 verse 6 says, Zerah's sons, Zimri, Ethan, Heman, Calcol, and Dara, 5 in all. These are people from Judah's line. These are all, and so he calls them something. He calls them that they're the sons of Mahal, but it's probably meaning that it's their profession. That this specific line of these guys were guys who were singers, and that they were from the line of Judah, and they had actually probably been worship leaders at some point. And so they had great wisdom historically. We don't know much about them, except there's 2 psalms for these guys. But Solomon's greater than them. So there you go. Yeah.
You know what though? That one for 88, the heading on that one that says for Heman the Ezrahite, the heading on that one says prayer in the face of death.
Interesting.
And then the other one says for Mansfield and Ethan, it says for 89, it says God's covenant with David.
Interesting.
So that's very,
Yeah, interesting. So these are guys who Solomon's known to have been wiser than these people. So at some point, and I'm not sure about the chronology with them, the writer of Kings is saying these people would have known these people and said, wow, even those guys, okay? Just shows you we should stop and
really
look who these people are. Sometimes these names are significant. Solomon, verse 32, Solomon spoke 3,000 proverbs. And his songs numbered 1,005. And he spoke about trees from the cedar in Lebanon to the hyssop growing out of the wall. He spoke about animals and birds and reptiles and fish. So it appears that his wisdom exceeded simply just proverbial wisdom, but that his wisdom also was probably in areas like botany and biology as well, and that he's writing about these things, talking about these things. And it says, emissaries of all the people sent by every king on earth who had heard of his wisdom came to listen to Solomon's wisdom. So he's so well known that kingdoms of the world are sending people to come and say, you've got to hear from this guy Solomon. The stuff that he's talking about, we need to know. Now notice the number of these songs here. He's written a lot, 3,000 Proverbs. So the bulk of Proverbs, the book of Proverbs, is from Solomon. In fact, there probably were so many songs or Proverbs written by Solomon that's why when you get to the book of Proverbs, there's this break that happens in the book of Proverbs, and it comes at Proverbs 25, and it says this: these two are Proverbs of Solomon, which the men of King Hezekiah of Judah copied. So we're talking 200 years later, people have said, oh, we've got more of these Proverbs from Solomon. Let's collect them together and put them here. And so we know that it appeared maybe they were finishing the book and they had a bunch more lying around. They said, let's add this to the book of Proverbs, because it probably started at some point, and then under the reign of Hezekiah, who was a really godly man, they started to bring back this kind of worship, and they said, let's put these in. Some of his songs, in fact, if you read Song of Solomon is some people talk about the nature of the book, and some believe that there is an overall kind of narrative storyline, a plot line that goes through it. It's really hard to follow. I don't know if the last time you tried to read through it, but it is. It's very difficult to trace the story, because it's not a narrative. It is not, and she did this, and he did this, and he said this. It appears to be really a group of songs. So some speculate that these were songs written by Solomon, and that some of these 1,005 songs find their way into Solomon's Song of Solomon. Now that book too, it's debated, really, is Song of Solomon is it more about Solomon, or are they written from Solomon? That's a whole nother discussion, but some speculate too that could have been some of those songs in that book are written as an ode to Solomon to celebrate his wedding day and things like that. But so there you go. So here's a guy who loved to write. I don't know about you, but I used to write a ton of songs in high school, and I've looked at them, and some I've kept, some I've just trashed because they're garbage. Like it's a song about a girl, it's a song about a girl, song about a girl, song about a girl, she didn't know who I am. Oh wait, there's a song about a girl, she didn't like me the way I like her. I mean, they're all the same things. I just tossed them all out, right? And so I got rid of a lot of it, but obviously there's some good stuff here. So much that people are saying there's something that this guy has to offer that we want to hear. And so that's what we see here. We got a few. You want to go? Should we go a little more? You want to try to go 5 more minutes? Let's go 5 more minutes. Here we go. King Hiram of Tyre sent his emissaries to Solomon when they heard that he had been appointed king in his father's place. For Hiram had always been friends with David. Anybody know where Tyre is? Where is Tyre? Now, if you have Google, you can look it up. That's okay. I try to do this in class too. I tell students, just look it up, because that's what we're all doing anyways. Just Google it. One day, it'll all be planted a chip in our head anyways, and we'll just have to blink, and then it'll pop up. So, anybody know where Tyre is? Often they're talked about in terms of the twin cities, Tyre and Sidon. Where are Tyre and Sidon located? What is the modern day country of Tyre? Well, Tyre's a city, but where was Tyre located? You got a phone, Mike. What'd you find? Oh, man. All right.
I thought all these other...
Tyre. He's tired.
It thinks I spell it wrong.
Oh, man. They're thinking you're looking for discount tires,
Yeah,
right?
tell me
Is that what it is?
Now I'm going to get ads.
Trying to sell them
If you look at your maps, you can see, I'm going to give you a hint. They are up in the north part of their more northern part of Israel. It's right up on the border, really, with Israel. If you look, it's typically located with an area called
Is it Lebanon?
Phoenicia. Yeah, it's Lebanon. So this entire, King Hiram of Tyre is in modern day Lebanon. Okay? And Hiram has been a friend. Now this is an anomaly. This is one of those cool things, which is you see this Gentile who is a king, him and David are very, very close. Remember, David had a lot of guys who loved him and respected him, and these Gentiles really just loved being around him. So here's this Gentile king who's in the northern part. He butts up, his kingdom butts up next to Israel, and he loved David, and he said, hey, look, man, I'm sorry to hear about your dad. I was his friend. I want to help you. And so it says, so Solomon sent this message to Hiram. You know my father, David, was not able to build a temple for the name of the Lord his God. This was because of the warfare all around him until the Lord put his enemies under his feet. The Lord my God has now given me rest on every side, and there's no enemy or crisis. So I plan to build a temple for the name of the Lord my God, according to what the Lord promised my father David. And I'll put your son on your throne in your place, and he will build a temple for my name. So just a couple things in here that we want to look at. First off, he talks about how David was not able to build the temple. Now it's interesting, he tells us that one of the reasons that David was not able to build the temple was what? Is that he said David was still having to fight the whole time. David had too many battles that were going on for him to be able to do it. But we also know that in 2 Chronicles that David was not able to build the house. Why? Does anybody know why one of the reasons why he was not able to build the temple? What Chronicles would have said? Too much blood. Yeah, actually, it's 1 Chronicles 28, and it says, you're not to build a house for a name because you're a man of war and have shed blood. And those two really go together. He's saying, you've been someone who's killed too many people, and Solomon saying, my dad was always at war. He's always, so it's the same idea is what he's saying, is he's not able to do this. Now, what we also know is in 1 Chronicles as well, that even before David died, David was already setting up stuff to have supplies brought in for the kingdom, for the temple and all of that. He's done everything except build the temple. So here are some things that he did for Solomon. This is 1 Chronicles, and it's beginning in, let's see. Well, I'm in 2 Chronicles. No wonder those verses didn't look right to me. It's like, man, I guess we jumped that far ahead already. Look at this. It says, now my son, the Lord be with you. May you succeed in building the house the Lord your God has said about you. Above all, may the Lord give you insight and understanding when he puts you in charge of Israel, so that you may keep the law of the Lord your God, and then you'll succeed if you carefully follow the statutes and ordinances the Lord commanded for Israel. Be strong, be courageous, don't be afraid or discouraged. Notice I've taken great pains to provide for the house of the Lord. 3,775 tons of gold, 37,750 tons of silver, bronze and iron that can't be weighed because there's much of it. I've also provided timber and stone, but you will need to add more to them. You will also have many workers, stone cutters, masons, carpenters, skilled people in every kind of work, in gold, silver, bronze, and iron, beyond number. Now begin the work, and may the Lord be with you. So David had already been collecting all of this valuable stuff. And so Solomon now is saying, we need wood. I need some wood. He goes and he said, and you'll see that in verse 6, that he's going to ask for the cedars from Lebanon. We know that Hiram had already started helping provide things for David as well. That he already started doing some of this already. So Hiram already knows what he needs to do. One thing, and then we're going to stop here, and then we'll pick up next time and talk more about this. But I hope you notice right now in verse 5, Solomon believes that he is the one who is the fulfillment of David's promise that God gave to David. Remember when God said, I'm going to put a man on your throne, he'll build a house for me? Solomon right now appears that as he's doing this, that he is the one that was prophesied in 2 Samuel 7. What we're going to see is He thinks he is. But the writer of Kings is going to show us he's not. And so there's a piece of where we need to look at the words of Solomon and recognize that there's Solomon's words, but they're not the narrator's words. And there's a part of that because what he's going to show us, and really what the rest of the book is going to show us, is that so far, no king is the fulfillment. Even though Solomon literally builds the temple, he's definitely not the one that was going to reign forever. That God would build the house, and let him reign forever in the line of David. In fact, God's ready to cut that short if it weren't for David that he loved anyway. So just something to think about as you read this. Solomon is getting ready to do all of this, and Solomon thinks he is the fulfillment, but he's not. So we'll get back to it, and actually we're going to have to, next time we meet, I'm going to have to do all the math over because we're about to have to do some weighing in bushels again. And so I get more time for us to talk about, how many bushels do you need and how many gallons of olive oil did it take to pay Hiram? Because Hiram says, yeah, just bring me food and I'll give you all the trees you want. Just one thing to know, and this is, I'll tell you again next time and it'll probably be cool. When he starts asking, he's asking for these cedars of Lebanon. It's interesting, they're known for their trees. In fact, even if you were to look at the Lebanese flag today, what is it? It's a cedar tree. And so they've always been known in that region for these incredible, majestic trees. And that's what's going to be used in that northern area to bring down and to really build the temple. All right, so there's that. I'm gonna stop. Anything you wanna talk about? One thing I do want to point out, it's kind of interesting. You see all this stuff, all these blessings that have come from Solomon, how really people are eating well and they're enjoying life. And I do think that there's a reason for why that's there. I don't know about you, but I feel like sometimes, we might feel guilty that we're enjoying the things that God has given us. There is this, and I think that's years of sometimes we try to guilt trip people to give more. How can you enjoy your fancy Wednesday night dinners, that you're paying $3 when know that somebody else is, and so that's how we've tried to get you to give more and to do more. And so a lot of times when you look at the excess that you have and you think that, oh, if I'm not totally without, if I want to enjoy it, it must be a bad thing because I've got all this extra and I should be doing something with it. And I do want you to think that it's a good thing when they have blessings. It's it's not, now Solomon is going to have excess, but even that, God wanted to give Solomon extra. He didn't tell him, just take all the extra, but make sure you give 100% of it away, Notice that it was a good thing to say that these people got to enjoy their vine and they got to enjoy their fig tree. Now, you might say, well, if all I had was a fig tree and a vine, I might be allowed to enjoy those too, but I can't enjoy, But I think the point is that it's not a bad thing to just enjoy what God has given you too. That there is a place for that. There's definitely a place for generosity and a place for giving, and we know that. But I think there's a balance that needs to happen at some point where you should feel that it's okay to enjoy a blessing that God has given you and to rest in that. And just to be thankful and to not feel guilty that you get to sit under your own fig tree and your own vine, and enjoy the blessings of the land that God has given you. Now, notice what I'm not saying. I'm not saying that now if you follow well, or if you just give enough, then you will have your own vine and your own fig. That's not the point. Just saying that there are seasons in our life. There were seasons in Israel's life where they were given that. And he tells them, the prophets say, one day you're going to get that again. And that just means there are times that God lets us have that. And do you enjoy it? And I think so there's a place for that. There's a place for just enjoying and being grateful for what he's given you in the excess sometimes. And that's one of the reasons I like this FPU stuff as well, is that there is a place for that. It kind of brings that back into focus, that it's not all about just never have anything and getting rid of everything, but it's also saying, yeah, but I also want to enjoy what God has also given me and to just be grateful, All right, anything else before we're done? All right, here's what we're going to do. I'm going to push my little button on this thing, and we will pray. We'll take a